Scotland. A land of stories whispered on the wind, carried by the waves that crash on the shore. City lights, country roads, misty mornings by the coast. Each photograph is a poem, each journey a diary of Scotland as we alone have seen it. There is no friend as loyal as a book or a song, and with every friendly face you meet, a new tale to be told, a new wonder to behold, a chance to be bold, to tread lightly and protect this place for future stories to come. So gather round and listen in. It's time for this story to begin. 2022 is Scotland's year of stories. Come and discover your own tale of Scotland.
It was the sunny month of June, when summer days were lang. I saw above the banks of Oy a lassie ruin tang, and as the winsome lassie rode, sae merrily she sang. Cut and rue, cut and rue, cut and rue the tang. O thou're a weel fair lass, says I, and God gin thou were mine, and gin thou had no tak offence at kissing lips o' thine. A skirt o' tang she haved on me, doon fell I wi' a bang. Cut and rue, cut and rue, cut and rue the tang. As slyly to the grund I fell, I pulled the lassie to, and though she fled and ca'd me names, it wasna ill to do. And there she fled, and there I wooed the muckle rose amang. Cut and rue, cut and rue, cut and rue the tang. And there I kissed her bonny moo, while she misca'd me still, and held her to me tift and heart till hers began to fill. And I, she said, I was a fool, and held her hour lang. Cut and rue, cut and rue, cut and rue the tang. She said that she must rise and work, and yet I thought mysel' she wasna our laith to sit while I me tale did tell. For I her wrath it wore awa, her wrath wi' love I dang. Cut and rue, cut and rue, cut and rue the tang. O pet thee hand in mine, quo' she, the tear was in her ee, and swear by a' that's good above, and dinno lee, and dinno brak a poor thing's heart, or do a lassie wrang. Cut and rue, cut and rue, cut and rue the tang. I couldna speak, me heart ran out, and blinded me wi' brine, for weel I wat wi' joy I grat to think the lass was mine. So there I won the lovely lass, the muckle rose amang. Cut and rue, cut and rue, cut and rue the tang. And noo the dame's me winsome wife, and we hae bairnies twa, and there's no a cruiser man and wife in the wide, wide world ava. As we sit by the Ingleswide when winter nights are lang. Cut and rue, cut and rue, cut and rue the tang.
Written by Walter Trill Dennison and sung there by Robin Nicholson. Now, when I was asked to do this tonight, I wasn't really sure what to do. I mean, I'm never really sure what to do. I'm like a habit of it. It's kind of the only code in life I have. It's just be clueless and hope for the best. And I hope you're all frisked from missiles before you came in. But, so I realised that a lot of folk that are involved in storytelling, they know stories through books, or folklore through books. And I started to realise that because my parents were middle-aged and old enough to have known better when I was born, that there's a lot of folklore and stories within my own family. So I started kind of teasing out a few of these, and this is what I've kind of come up with. Now, my father was born in Island Sandy in 1911, and my mother was born in Ireland the Westry in 1922. So my grandparents were born in the 1880s. And there was one night at home, phone rings, and pick up, and it's a very instantly recognisable voice. A soft, rich, sonorous Swedish accent said, "Hello, Tom, this is Bo." So this is Bo Almquist. He was an old friend of mine. He was a professor of folklore. He was from Uppsala in Sweden, but he'd worked in Iceland, and he was the head of the folklore department at University College Dublin. Now, I had republished the works of Walter Trill Dennison, folklore, in 1995, the guy that wrote the song that you just heard. And one of the stories in it comes from a Scandinavian tradition that's known as the Utburg tradition. And it's a tradition of a baby not being able to rest if it wasn't christened, if it wasn't given a name. The soul of the child couldn't rest. There was a man in Sandy called James Scott. Fine man, honest man, good man, very popular. But misfortune came to the house because scarlet fever was sweeping the island. And his wife and 3 of the bairns were in bed with a fever. And during that time, the wife gave birth to a baby boy. He was a fine, strong lad, but unfortunately, he took the fever and died within a day or two. Now, seems he hadn't been christened. He was buried in the kirkyard. And time passed, and the man was out hunting rabbits one night. Well, he would have been poaching, actually. And he was doing about hands with the kirkyard dyke, and he seen a white shape in front of him. And he thought it was a colt that he had, a young horse, that he called Stumpy. So he shouted to it, "How do I home Stumpy?" And the white shape rose up into the sky, and it started to radiate a bright, beautiful light. And a baby's voice came from in it and said, "Thank you, Father, for giving me a name. Now I can rest." So off he went, called Stumpy. The hell of bureaucratic upstairs. Now, Dennison remembered that the people, a woman came to him one day. He was known as a writer, collector of folk tales and lore, and a poet. And the woman came to him and said that their child had died. This was in 1846. And the child had died, and it needed a name because it hadn't been christened. And she wanted him to write the name on a slip of paper because they were illiterate, so they couldn't write. And he wrote the child's name down on the bit of paper, and she was going to pin it to the bairn's shroud, as he described it, a passport to paradise. The child had a name so it could be allowed in. Now that was the last. He thought that this was quite late for that tradition, 1846. So one night I was on the phone to my mum, and I mentioned this for some reason. And she said, "Oh yeah, Uncle Johnny did that." And I said, "Eh?" He goes, "Yeah, Uncle Johnny did that when his boy died." I said, "I had no idea he had a boy." Now, Johnny, best known as Trousdale in Westry, because he was one of twins. He had a twin sister, born in 1879. And the doctor that delivered them was Dr. Trousdale, and he asked if it would be all right to give Bairn his name as a middle name, so he ended up Trousdale. There's a lot of it about. My middle name is Stewart with a W, after Betty Stewart, who was my midwife as well. So I don't know how common this is. But anyway, that song there, Cut and Rue the Tang, is about cutting seaweed, that's the tang, and rueing it was putting it into mounds for drying later. And then it would be burned and it would be shipped off to usually Newcastle to be used in the chemical industry. And it was a big business in Orkney at one time. And my uncle, well, great uncle, Johnny, he was always just known as Uncle Johnny. His wife, Catherine Miller, her parents were kelp workers. That's what they're down on the 1911 census. He's living with them, with his wife. They are kelp workers. He is a carter. So he's got a horse and cart. He goes down to the pier and collects stuff and brings it to shops or moves things around. He's basically like having a transit van these days, you know. He was doing that. Now, the one day his wife was pregnant and she was almost full term. And he said, "Whatever you do, don't go and work in the kelp, because it's heavy, hard, wet, cold work, and you're not in any condition to be doing that." And he left to go to Pierrewell, which, you know, quite a few miles away with his horse and cart. But her father made her go down to the shore and work. Gather up, in those days it was tangles, we call them, the kelp stems. Get washed ashore after storms. So she had to carry those up the beach, and she went into labour and she lost the child. Now, my uncle, great uncle, Trousdale, he had a stone, a gravestone put up in the kirkyard at Pierrewell in Westry, with the name George Drever on it, which was my grandfather's name, so his younger brother. So he was named George, that was on the gravestone, but he also wrote the name on a slip of paper and pinned it to the shroud of the child. And that was in 1912. So then you've got a tradition that was last recorded in 1846, still happening in 1912. Therefore, there must have been other people that knew that and had been doing it in the meantime as well. He was quite a character. I remember he died in 1975. He was nearly 96 years old. And he was drafted in the First World War, Seaforth Highlanders. Ended up being transferred to the Black Watch and going to Salonika. He was in the Labour Division, so they were digging trenches and such like. And before he went, he decided he wasn't going to take his watch with him, his pocket watch. And his wife said, "No, you should do, you know, good to be on time, like the army, you know, they don't like it if you're late. So he took his pocket watch in the breast pocket, and one day during hand-to-hand fighting, one of the enemy soldiers swung the bayonet into him and hit him on the chest and had his pocket watch, which saved his life. And they said, well, what did you do, boy? Oh, he says, I stuck the bayonet in him and fired the shot to make sure. But the thing is, that action lived with him for the rest of his life. He had nightmares for the next 60 years. There would always be night terrors about that. Now, since discovering all of that, I found another 2 versions of the Utgard story in Orkney, one from Ceilidh, one from Dearness. And the one in Dearness recorded a child that was haunting a road. So whenever somebody was walking along this road, you would hear the sound of a child coming, walking behind them, crying, weeping, miserably. And people were scared to go along that road. It was said that the mother of the child was a young woman who was a farm worker and had got pregnant and had murdered the child when it was born and buried it on the side of a mound, because nobody would disturb a mound because that's where the fairies live. And so it haunted this road. Now there was a wee pub, a wee ale house at Ceilidh nearby, and there was a fella that was there, and he'd had quite a few ales, and he was going home along the shore, and he hears the sound of the child coming weeping behind him, and he says, "How do I with your bare arse? So go away, bare arse." And the crying stopped, because the bear had been given a name, bare arse. And the other one is kind of similar as well. So it's always that the name is given as a sort of a comedy name for a tragic story. You know? Now there's another storyteller in Orkney who's not unlike Brad Pitt. And I think there's a wee bit of film of him up here 7 years ago when Jamie in the front row you turned up to do some filming. So put on Brad. What do you, Maria?
Tam Bicken was the best fiddle player in all of the parish of Dearness. Whenever there was a muckle supper or a wedding, he was always called on to play his fiddle. Now one day, he went down to the beach right here at Dingishowie, and he stood where I am, on the line between the high and the low water. And he played his fiddle, just for the sheer joy of playing the fiddle. Now this was a dangerous thing to do, because he was on this part of the ground, on this beach between high and low water, which was neither part of the land nor part of the sea, because sometimes it was covered with water and sometimes it wasn't. And it was said to be a haunt for evil spirits. And also, it was Midsummer's Day. And that is the time when the trows, the fairy folk in Orkney, have their most power. Midsummer and midwinter. Well, he was playing away and he realised he wasn't alone, because trotting along the beach was a wee figure, or a wee man, no bigger than about a 5-year-old bairn, but the funniest looking 5-year-old Tam had ever seen. He had long grey hair and long grey whiskers and big bushy eyebrows and wee mischievous twinkling dark eyes, and he said, "That was a good bit of playing there, Tam." "Oh, thanks," says Tam. Never struck him that the creature knew his name, but he knew that this must be a trow. And he says, "We're having a party tonight at the big mound at Dingishowie, right up there." would you come and play for me at me hoose? I would, he says, always up for a party. So he followed the trow up the beach there, up to that mound at Dingishowie, and there was a doorway standing in the side of it. They went through the door and down a long tunnel deep into the heart of the mound. They came to a big chamber. It had nothing in it but a barrel at one end. And he said, jump up on top the barrel there. And he goes, would you like a drink? Oh, never say no to a drink, says Tom. And he pulled the bung out of this barrel and he filled a cog full of heather ale. And he handed the wooden cog to him and he took a drink and he says, that's heather ale, boy. It's the best drink you'll ever taste. And oh man, it started to work. He felt a glow spreading through him and his fingers tingled and his toes tingled and his nose tingled. Maybe other bits of him tingled as well, but it's not that sort of story. And he started to play. And oh, the music just poured out of that fiddle, just like fine wine. And the trow was dancing and hooking, and the other trows came from other rooms and other mounds, and they were dancing and hooking and drinking heather ale, and the music and the dancing and the fun went on all night. But eventually the trow started to disappear off home, and Tom started to get tired, and he said it was time for him to go. And the trow says, well, thanks very much for coming and playing, and whenever you want to come back, you're more than welcome, but bring your fiddle with you. No. Tom walked up the long tunnel, and when he came outside, he yawned and stretched, and he looked behind him. But the doorway was gone. It was just the grass blowing on the sand mound. So he set off and started to walk home. And then he started to notice that things weren't quite right. I mean, there was a hoose up there in the brae that swore was never there before, and that place looks different, and they've got their haystack in, but they hadn't yesterday. But he thought, well, I'm tired. I've had a lot of heather ale. I must just be seeing things. So he turned down the road to the house where he lived with his mother. But when he got there, he got the shock of his life, because the house was standing as a ruin, with no roof on and no glass in the windows. He went in and shouted for his mother, but there was no answer. He wandered around in a daze, not knowing what to do. And he saw a wee boy on the road, and he shouted to him, and he asked him, here boy, what happened to the house up there and the old woman that lived in it? I've no idea, said the boy. You'd better come home and speak to me, father. So he followed the boy home, and he went into a room, and there was a man, elderly man, sitting at a table, just eating a bit of piece for his breakfast and a cup of tea. And when he seen Tom, his face got as white as a sheet, like he'd seen a ghost. And he said, Tom Bicken? Is that you, boy? And he said, aye, I'm Tom Bicken, but I'm sorry, I don't ken who you are. And he said, well, I'm Andrew Daldy. You don't recognise me. And he says, you're no Andrew Daldy, you're fair too old. He says, boy, I don't ken about me being too old, but Tom, I'm thinking that you're too young. What do you mean too young? Well, you've been away for a long time, Tom. No, I haven't. Just been away for a night. Oh, no. Now, let's see. It was 14 years and a day ago since we last seen you. You were heading off down to the beach at Dingishowie, and you never came back. And we thought you'd fallen into the sea and drowned. And we'd searched for your body, you know, but it was never washed up. And, well, the time passed, and your mother, she was an old woman, you know, she died, and nobody took on the croft house, and there was a big gale, and the thatch got off the roof, and the windows went in, but now here you are back, and not looking a day older than when he left. They said the very cap on his head was exactly the same. Now the news spread like wildfire all over Dearness. Tom Bicken was back, and everybody wanted him to come and play for them, but he never played in public again. But sometimes, when he was on his own and thought that there was nobody around, people would sometimes hear him picking strange tunes on his fiddle that no one had ever heard before. But he never settled in again. And one day he was seen coming walking down to the beach here at Dingishowie with his fiddle in his hand, and he never came back. But they say that if you come down here in midsummer and you go to that mound at Dingishowie and you put your lug right close against it, you can hear the sound coming from inside, or a fiddle playing and a party in full swing. This is the stone of Quaibone, and it's a standing stone that has a bit of a thirst, because every Hogmanay it goes down to the Boardhouse Loch there to take a drink at midnight. But if you try to see it going down for its drink, then it will kill you. So nobody goes out to look. But there was a story that a young man was shipwrecked here on the coast of Bershey, and he was taken in by an old couple who lived in a wee cottage just near here. And he helped them out around the farm, did pretty bits and pieces of work for them. And when it came up to Hogmanay, they warned him, whatever you do, don't go out on Hogmanay and look at that stone, because it goes down to the loch for a drink, and it's bad luck, it will kill you, nobody survives it. But he was a brave, daring man, so he decided that he wanted to go down and see it. And to make sure that he didn't miss anything, he climbed up to the top of it. I mean, he was a sailor, this was the days of sailing ships, he was used to shitting up and down masts. So he sat right on the top of it. And in the morning, they found his body lying crushed in front of the stone, where it had rolled over the top of him on its way down to get its dram for Hogmanay. The island behind me is Coppensea, and a long time ago there was only one man that lived on the island, a farmer, and he'd gone to his bed one night and he was just falling off to sleep, and he was dreaming of the girl that he loved, that he would soon be marrying, when he noticed that he wasn't alone in the room, because over in the doorway there was a strange looking creature, small, covered with scales, with seaweed for hair and a seaweed beard. And it shivered away at him in a language that he didn't understand. Now, the man knew that the word of God and steel was a good protection against evil, so he took a psalm book from under his pillow and the cutthroat razor from off the shelf, and he jumped on the floor to do battle with the monster. The creature was naked and had a flat head which was bald, but there was seaweed growing around it. And the man cut a circle in the air with a knife, but the creature just carried on chipping away at him. The man picked up the poker from the fire and threw at him, but he just sprang to one side and missed. He threw the fire tongs at him and the crook that the kettle hung on, but he just chomped away. The man ended up being so infuriated that he set on him with his fists and he punched him, and the creature howled and ran out the door. Now when the man sat down and he cooled down a bit, he realised something, that that creature never actually tried to hurt him. It just stood there trying to communicate. So he waited, and after a while the creature came back and he carried on talking in this strange language, but after a while the farmer got used with it and he could understand what he said. He said his name was Hugo and he lived in the sea, but he was fed up and gnawing on dead men's bones and he wanted to come and live on land. And if the farmer would allow him to live there, he would help him by grinding some meal in the quernstone for the farmer's breakfast porridge. All that he asked in return was a wee bowl of porridge for himself and some milk to pour on it. The man was happy for any help he could get, and one less job to do was good for him, so he agreed, and he went back to bed, and he could hear the gritty chuckle of the quernstones turning as the creature poured the barley into the top of it and turned. Now the man realised that he had to tell his intended wife about this, because she was going to have to live with him too. So he went over to Dearness here, to this parish where she lived, and he told her about Hoogbow. And she said that she was fine with that, and she came out to the island and she said, well, if he's helpful to you, then that's fine with me. So the time came, they were married, and she went to live with him in Coppinsea. Now, they paid little attention to Hoogbow. He went around and he did his chores, but she started to feel uncomfortable around him. He was naked, and she thought that that was unseemly for a married woman to be this creature trotting around naked in front of her. And she also thought his flat, bald head was ugly, and so she decided that he should be covered. So she got an old cloak with a hood on it that would cover his flat head, and she left it lying over the quernstone waiting for him. And when he came in that night and he seen the cloak and the hood there, he set up a wail and he ran round and round the quern saying, Hoogbow's gotten a cloak and hood, so Hoogbow can do no more good. And with that he ran out into the night and was never seen on Coppinsea again. The deal that had been made had been broken because he had received payment for what he'd done.
There was one night, it must have been in the early 80s, I went home to the farm where I was born to visit family. It's a place called Valdiga, which I'm reliably informed by a folklore expert from the university in Reykjavik that it means the farm of Valdis. Valdis was the Viking who one time broke out the land there and farmed it. Now I was sitting there late one night, as is my wont, reading, and I had a sound coming from outside, from down at the beach. And it was the sound of a woman sobbing. And I was really worried, because I mean, she was sobbing her heart out. It was real desperate, terrible despair. But then there was a groan that faded off into the distance that was not human. Absolutely no way was that human. But then the sobbing started again. And I thought, my God, there's somebody in need of help. And then the groan, that unearthly groan that showed that that was no human being. I was confused, not difficult to do. And it took me a wee while to figure out what it was. It was a seal. You see, seals make a whole array of noises. They can howl, not like a dog, but it's just a plaintive wail. But they make a whole array of other sounds as well, including that sobbing sound. And it's not difficult to realize, to figure out why people believed that there was a human inside that seal skin. The belief in Selkie folk would have come from that. So I'm going to use that as an excuse to tell you one of my favourite stories. There was a young man Fidernus was on his way home late one night. What he'd been up to, I don't know, not my business. But he was going home really late when he heard music. Now, that was very unusual. Where was that coming from? So he decided to go and have a look. So he went around the shore, but he knew he had to be careful because he might end up running into somebody he didn't want to run into. You know, these people could be up to no good. He could get his throat slit. He didn't know. So he went down into a piece of the cliff that kind of shut it out from the shore. And he hid behind there and he peeped around. And there was a rocky beach, seaweed, and then there was a lovely sandy beach. And there was two men sitting on a flat rock playing fiddles. That's where the music was coming from. And on the shore, in the moonlight, there was a group of people dancing. And around them there was dark shapes lying on the ground, like animals lying asleep. He got down on his belly and he crawled along that rocky shore till he got down to the sand. And he made it over to where the animals were lying. And he saw then what they were. They were sealskins, empty sealskins. And he knew then that this was the night when the Selkie folk can take the skins off and dance in the moonlight for the night. But as soon as the sun rises again, they have to be back in their skins and back in the sea. Now, one of the skins was more beautiful than the others. It was a lovely, soft, silvery skin. And he picked it up and it felt so soft. It felt so right. So he rolled it up and he hid it under his jacket. And he went back to his hiding place. And he watched them for the rest of the night as they danced in the moonlight. But as soon as the first light of the sun peeped above the horizon, the music stopped, they ran down to their skins, they pulled them on, and they jumped into the sea as seals. All except for one young woman, who frantically searched among the rocks and the seaweed, looking for her skin, but she couldn't find it. In the end, in her desperation, despair, she ran around the corner of that cliff, straight into the young man's arms. And he held her and he looked down into her big, brown, frightened eyes, and he thought that she was the most beautiful woman that he had ever seen in his whole life. And he knew that he could never be happy unless he had her as his wife. She had other ideas, mind you. She belted them and kicked them and scratched them and bit them and squeaked it out to her in the Selkie tongue, because the Selkies have their own language too. But he carried her up to the house where he lived with his mother. And his mother, well, she wasn't stupid. She knew what this girl was. And she also felt pity for her, poor lass. She sat her by the fire and wrapped a shawl around her. And she went through to the ben end of the house, like the best room. And there was a chest there, a wooden chest. And she opened the lid and she raked down into the bottom till she found a dress that used to fit her when she was young and slim and beautiful as well. And she took the dress through and gave it to the girl to wear. And the girl carried on with the sobbing, the crying for a week or two. But then she went quiet. And the old woman was kind to her. So was the man as well. He did feel guilty for what he'd done, but he was obsessed with her. He couldn't let her go. Now, the old woman taught her how to do things around the house, how to bake and brew and how to spin wool and all these sort of things. And it was obvious that the Selkie woman was very fond of the man. She followed him everywhere. And it wasn't a big surprise when the two of them were married and they had a family. And they were very happy. They said that there was no bonnier bairns in Dearness than those between that man and his silky wife. Now one day she took him aside and she said to him, I want you to make me a promise. Now, you know that I'm a creature of the sea, and I know that you've got my skin, and I know where you hide it. It's in that chest in the ben end of the house. And I know you always keep it locked and you always keep the key on your person. But if you love me, never ever let me get that key, because I don't know if I would be strong enough to be able to resist the urge to go back to the sea once more. So if you love me, if you really love me, then never let me get that key. He promised faithfully that he would. A time passed and it was August. It was the time of the Lammas Fair in Kirkwall, which was a big event. And the man decided that he would take his children there as a treat for them. And he got them all washed and in their Sunday best clothes. And he had a wash and a shave and he put on his best suit. And they got ready to go. The Selkie woman decided she didn't want to go. She said it would give her a good opportunity to stay home and give the place a good clean when they were out from under her feet. So they went into Kirkwall and they had the most wonderful time in front of that great red sandstone cathedral of St. Magnus. And there was all sorts of things. The bairns had spun sugar on a stick. They'd never seen the likes of that before. They played on rides. It was just a magical day for them. And then later on in the evening they were heading off back on the horse and cart, back towards Dearness. And when they got near the house, the man could see that something was wrong. There was no lights on in the window, there was no smoke coming from the chimney. And when he got nearer, he saw that the door was standing wide open. He ran in and shouted for his silky wife, but there was no answer. And then he realized what must have happened. In his haste to get ready, he had forgot to take the key out of the pocket of his jacket. And when she was tidying up, she wouldn't have been looking for it, but when she picked up that jacket, she could feel that key in the pocket. And she knew what that key opened and what was inside waiting for her. She took out the key and she stared at it. And then she went through to the ben end of the room, put the key in the lock and turned it with a click and opened the lid, and there was her skin. And when she saw her skin once more, the urge just to touch it was too strong. And then when she touched it, the urge just to pick it up was too great. And then when she did that, she just had to hold it next to her. And when that sealskin touched her skin, and she could still smell the salt on it, she knew that she had to go back. So she ran down to the shore, and with a cry of anger and anguish, frustration, she pulled on that skin and dived into the sea and swam away as a seal once more. Now that man never stopped searching for his silky wife. Not a day went by that he didn't go down to the shore and look for her, but he never saw her again. But they did say that sometimes when the bairns, the children, were down on the shore playing, a seal would swim backwards and forwards in front of them, sobbing like its heart was breaking. Now, I put together a collection of stories in 1998 called The Mermaid Bride and Other Orkney Folktales. First of it, they'd all been pulled together. And it's the 25th anniversary of that next year. And it's being republished as a special edition It's never actually been out of print. It goes out of print every now and again when they've run out, and then they reprint more and keep it going. So it's basically been in print for 25 years. And it's got all the sources in the back as well, so if anybody's researching, they can go to the primary source. And as a part of this, there's 2 new stories that I've found, and there's a third one that's lost that I'm trying to track down. I know it's out there. It used to be on a reel-to-reel tape, which is missing. I knew about it at the time, couldn't find it. I'm a man on a mission. But there was another Selkie story that I came across, which is worth throwing in, because never heard this before, or anything similar. There was an Earl in Norway, a rich and powerful man, a wealthy man, with lots of land. And he was married, and he had a young family that were his pride and joy. But bad luck can befall anyone, even an Earl. His wife complained about being sick one day. She didn't feel well. She went to her bed. She got worse. And after a week or 2, she died. And they were heartbroken. But after a while, the Earl decided that his children needed a mother. And there was a woman that he noticed. She was a widower. She had a son of her own, who was about ages with his middle children. And she was lovely, sweet, kind. She always smiled at his children. He liked that. So he asked her to marry him, and she agreed. Wedding was held, and she went to live in his great hall as his wife. Everything was sweetness and light and happiness. Only it wasn't, was it? That stepmother, she hated those kids. She detested them. She wanted them dead. Because when the Earl died, then all his fortune would be left to his children. And what about her son? Would he get crumbs from the table? Would he get even that? No, something had to be done. And so she decided that they had to go. She went to see an old woman who lived in the area, who had the reputation of being a witch. She told her the problem. These children, they're in the way of my son inheriting the earldom. I want rid of them. The old woman gave it a lot of thought, and then she smiled, twisted across her mouth, and she threw back her head and she laughed, a dry, cracked laugh. And she started to run around and pull down bunches of herbs dried on the couples and the rafters. And she started to measure them out. She went to chairs and she got powders out and she put them all into a mortar. She got a pestle out. She ground it down till it was a fine powder. And she gave it to the stepmother and said, put some of that, well, put all of that in the children's food. But whatever you do, don't eat any of it yourself. Don't let your son eat any of it, or the Earl, just the children. And when they eat that, well, as soon as they go into the sea, because the woman had noticed that they did love to swim, they will turn into fishes. No one will be any the wiser as to what happened to them. So she thanked her, she paid for her, and she went away. And the next day there was a holy day coming up. And there was to be a little swimming contest between the children, just for their fun, entertainment. And she was very careful that day. She shooed them out the kitchen. She made a big bowl of porridge for them. And then she went to get that powder. And when she came back, she was in such a hurry, she tripped and spilt a lot of it on the floor. She scraped up what she could back into the chair, and she went over, and she realised that it was only about half of what there had been. But she poured it into the porridge, and she stirred it in mightily till it was all mixed through, and then she very carefully dished it up into the bowls for the children, and she got them in, and they ate hungrily, as children do. And then they went off. After a wee while, it was going to be the swimming event, and the stepmother went down with them. She watched those children. She watched those children the way that a snake watches a mouse. Eyes narrow. And they were in the water splashing around. Nothing was happening. She was getting worried until the youngest child let out a cry. And they could see that she was thrashing around in distress. Her body was becoming longer. And her arms and legs were turning into fins. But they weren't fins. They were more like flippers. And all the other children started to change as well. But because she had spilt half of that potion, it only had half the strength, and it didn't turn them into fish. It turned them into something that was halfway between an animal and a fish. And that is the origin of the first of the Selkie folk. But seems she had lost half of that powder. It meant that those children could come ashore every so often, at certain times. They could still come ashore and take the skins off and take their human form once more. I never heard that story before. I was delighted. I knew the guy it came from. Willie and Even in North Ronaldsay. Lovely old chap. Got a couple of paintings of sailing ships that he did in Warehouse. So, yeah, lovely. One of the stories in the Denison book is ancient. It's a myth about the ruler of the sea. And the story says that there is the spirit of a woman, a goddess, that rules the sea in the summer months. And she can calm the storms, and she gives life to all the creatures in the sea. And that is a time of plenty for people, because they can go to the fishing and get fish, and they can get lobsters and crabs. It's good times. But she has a rival, a male spirit called Terran. And Terran, she kept bound at the bottom of the sea, tied up in chains. But as the year wore on and her strength grew weaker and weaker because of giving life to all those creatures in the sea, calming the storms, Terran's own strength became greater and greater, until in the autumn he could break his bonds, and then the two of them would fight under the sea. And that's what causes the storms that we have at the equinox. That's when the two of them are fighting. And Terran defeats the mother of the sea. And she has to go and live in exile on the land, invisible to mortal eyes. And there she has to wait over the winter while Terran rules the sea, raises storms, fish go off into deeper water, so does the lobsters. The crabs hunker down into the sand, and it's a bad time. Ships are cast ashore, boats are wrecked. But all that evil and destruction takes it out of a spirit. And he becomes weaker and weaker as well, till in the springtime, at the equinox, the mother of the sea goes back into the sea, and the two of them fight, and that's when we get the storms then as well. And she defeats him, and she chains him up once more at the bottom of the sea, and then her rule begins again, and everything is plenty, peaceful and calm. Now that story has got to be seriously old, because no Christian is going to say God created the world and the universe and everything and rules everything except for the sea. That's that girl that runs the sea. You're going to find yourself on the wrong end of a box of matches if you were trying to say that, you know, in the Middle Ages or so. So it could be Viking, but it's not Viking, because we know the story of the Viking gods and who they are. She's not in it. And so you have to go back to at least the Picts, possibly further back. I suspect it goes back a long, long way. Neolithic, possibly even Mesolithic. It's an ancient story, but one that was so strong and that people loved, respected, that it was passed on. They could live that duality between Christianity and what is a goddess in the sea. Now, when that Denison book was published in '95, there was a guy that I knew who worked at the library. He was the grandson of an old woman that lived next door to my grandfather, Geordie Draver, at North Chewin. And he was going off to the fishing one day when he was a boy. And my grandfather said to him, "Make sure you don't catch the mother." And they had no idea what he was talking about until he read that book. Now, I don't know whether that's what he was referring to, but it seems quite likely, actually. So my granddad knew about it, which is kind of cool. I started digging as a 17-year-old, as a school dropout. He'll come to a bad end, possibly. Haven't got there yet. But I ended up going to work in an archaeological dig at a big mound called Howe outside Stromness. And there is a folk tale about that, similar to the one that you had the other guy talking about earlier. Only this is better because I'm better than him. So there was a guy, two men from Orford had gone to Stromness to buy whiskey for Hogmanay. And they got a big stone chair, a pig, as they know it, a big stone pig, and they filled it up with whiskey, and they were walking up with it, you know, on the shoulder, heading home. And when they got near the mound at Howe, the road ran right past the side of it. They could hear the sound of pipes playing. So they went to investigate, and there was a door standing wide open in the side of the mound that hadn't been there before. And there was light coming out of it and the music. And they looked inside, and there was all the fairy folk, all the trowels were all dancing and having a great time. And the one man with the whiskey went in and started dancing. And his pal waited outside because he didn't trust these little, you know. And he said, "Are you coming out?" And he'd always say, "Oh, wait till the reel's finished." And he'd wonder, "Are you coming out yet?" "Oh, wait until the reel's finished." And this happened a few times. He got fed up, so he went home himself, thinking his pal would be, you know, on his heels. But he wasn't. And what was worse, neither was the whiskey. So they went back to look. And there was the mound, but there was no door in it. No music, no man, no whiskey. The following year, the man, the other guy, was back in Stromness buying whiskey. went past the big mound at home, had a similar, a familiar tune. Went and had a look, and there was a doorway open in the side of the mound, and there was his pal dancing. And he said, "Are you not coming out yet?" And he said, "Wait till the reel's finished." So he grabbed him and pulled him out. "What did you do that for?" He says, "It's high time you were coming out of there." "I've only just gone in." He said, "No, you haven't. You've been in there for a year." "Rubbish," he says. "Can't have been." He said, "Look at your shoes, man." So he looked down, and he had danced the soles off his shoes. It was just the uppers flapping around. And what was worse, the pig of whiskey was empty as well. Now, my great-grandmother in Westray used to brew very strong home-brewed ale. And my great-grandfather, being a selfless man like myself, used to drink it for her. And he had an old pal, it was a sea captain. He used to come by the house, and the two of them would get food. And the old pal, when he was walking home, there was a big mound next to the house in North Jewin. And he used to say that when he went past it drunk, he could see the Picts dancing on top of the mound. Picts tend to get mixed up with fairies, Charles, in Orkney. Or ancient monuments, which is called Pict houses. So there you go. But when I was researching Mermaid Bride, just to kind of line things up, you'll be happy here, back in the 90s, I was going through a guy called Ernest Marwick's papers, folklorist, historian from Orkney. And I was going through all his papers, and I found a scrap of paper. And it said that there was a curse on the Draper family. And that one of them, George Draper, had just shot himself. He'd committed suicide. And that this was because there was a curse on the family, and the curse had been weighing upon him, and that's why he'd done it. But all the descendants of these people were all cursed as well, because they two of these guys were elders in the kirk, and they, along with the Reverend Brochie, the minister in Westray, had murdered a laird and had been cursed. Who the hell curses anybody for murdering a laird? I don't think he should have got a bloody medal. But anyway, but they said, yeah, they're all cursed, all the descendants are cursed. And I thought, shit, because the guy that had committed suicide was my uncle, who I never met because he died in 1961. I was born in 63. But why he died is, to me, a heroic sacrifice. Because it wasn't a curse that was worrying him. He had a brain tumour, and he had started to behave erratically. And he asked the doctor if he posed any danger to his wife and children. And the doctor said, I can't answer you that. He might have periods where he had no idea what he was doing. And so he went out into the engine shed of the barn and he shot himself. Now, I was intrigued about this curse, but I couldn't ask my mum, because that's her big brother, you know. But then I heard the story in Westray. And the story goes that the laird was going to leave all his money and lands to the Church of Scotland. And the Reverend Brochie was a trustee for the estate, and he stood to be the man in charge of all the money and the land and everything. And then, suddenly, out of the blue, Laird got himself a girlfriend, got engaged to be married. Bummer. What happens if they have kids? Then that's the cut out the window, you know, they're not going to get the money. So, along with a couple of the elders, including a direct ancestor of mine, they managed to pull a quite a nasty one on him, because he went away south on business. And he told the Reverend Brochie to keep an eye on his fiancée, make sure she was okay everything was fine. Look out for her interests. So when he was away, he went over to her and he said, the laird doesn't want to marry you. He wants to break it off, but he didn't have the heart to tell you himself, so he asked me to do it. But he did say that you should be off the island by the time he gets back from business and be away and never see him again. The girl was heartbroken. I mean, they actually were in love with each other. So she was devastated. She left Westbury. He comes back. Where's my fiance? Oh, she's dumped you. She says she's off. So, you know, maybe another bloke involved. I don't know, but, you know, not one for gossip. So off he went. And then the minister and the two elders, two direct ancestors, took him for flying lessons by throwing him out an upstairs window of his house and broke his neck. And then I heard that that's not true either. It's a wonderful way that these things go. He was, he went to the manse, to the Reverend Brochy, and he was poisoned. And it's said at the time he had enough poison in him to stop a horse. So that's it. But according to that, I am cursed. And I thought, well, no, it makes sense. Yeah, everything starts to fall into place. Ah, right, okay, cursed. That figures. But I figured that I've probably been redeemed or forgiven in some way anyway for something that had nothing to do with me. Because since then I have met and married the most wonderful, beautiful woman and have never been happier in my life. And we are about to launch a publishing business as well. We have a website, orkneyology.com, loads of stories on that. And I've got 2 lovely kids, 4 lovely stepchildren as well, and a granddaughter this year as well. So I think I'm not doing too bad. But I should just wind up by thanking Jamie here. Jamie Chambers is the guy that came up in 2015, filmed Brad, and had and has put this together. And this is the first of 5 events. Map of Stories, film Ceilidh. There will be another 4. And also, as of today, the website, the Map of Stories.scot is the name of the website. Mapofstories.scot, and that contains that Selkie story I just told you and some other bits and pieces in it as well. So, as I saw a film once of Ivor Cutler, who finished the concert by saying, I would like to thank most of you for coming. But on this occasion, I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming. Some dear friends in the audience, as well as some friends that I don't know yet. So, anyway, thank you very much. I'll get big-headed.